Welcome to the Easy Clocking software tutorial. In this tutorial, we will be demonstrating the initial startup process for first-time users. This is a multi-step process which every user must go through prior to beginning use of the Easy Clocking time and attendance software. Upon purchase of your time and attendance system, you will have received an email with login instructions and predefined credentials, company ID, user ID, and password. Upon login, you will be required to enter a new password to be assigned to your profile. Selecting Change will enroll the new password within the software and lead you to the Easy Clocking Initial Startup menu. The Initial Startup menu options will differ from that of the regular software menu options. All options specified within the Initial Startup can be altered at a later time by administrators registered within the software. You may schedule a more comprehensive training of the software at any time by contacting Easy Clocking Headquarters. English and Spanish trainings of the software are currently on offer. Easy Clocking software initiation is broken down into 8 steps. Step 1. The first screen displayed within the initial setup of the Easy Clocking software pertains to general terms and conditions that must be accepted prior to software use. Selecting the Accept Terms and Conditions option is necessary to ensure compliance. Select Next to continue onto the Company tab of the initial startup. Step 2. Within the Company tab, you will be tasked with entering your company name, country which the business is located, and a company logo should you choose to do so. The company settings can be found within the General sub-tab of the Settings tab of the Easy Clocking software. Select Next upon completion to continue on to the Locations tab of the initial startup. Step 3. Within the Locations tab, you must enter the names to be assigned to your business locations. We recommend that if you only have one location, you name it Maine, or the city wherein your business resides. Location names are fully customizable and only to be used as a reference to differentiate business locations within the Easy Clocking software. Only one location is needed within the initial setup. Additional locations may be added at a later time if required. The company locations can be found within the Locations sub-tab of the Settings tab of the Easy Clocking software. Upon entering the locations to be enrolled, select Next to continue on to the Pay Settings tab of the initial startup. Step 4. Within the Pay Setting tab, there are 4 company settings to be configured relating to company pay settings. All of these settings can be reconfigured later within the General sub-tab of the Settings tab of the Easy Clocking software. Within the Pay Period Frequency drop-down menu, you must specify whether your payroll is done weekly, every week, bi-weekly, every other week, monthly, once a month, or semi-monthly, twice a month. Enter the pay period start date specifies the date of the next pay period. Based on the date entered, the first day of the work week will be automatically selected. You have the option of selecting the round-off rule desired for your company. You may round off by quarter hour or by the 10th of an hour. Should you choose either round-off rule, then you must checkmark whether you wish to round off only the first and last punch on each day, and/or to round all punches automatically. Should you choose to use schedules for employees to be registered within the software, select the Yes option. Select Next to continue on to the Pay Class tab of the initial startup. Step 5. The Pay Class settings defined here within the initial setup will become the company default settings. What is the maximum continuous hours an employee will work? This is defined as the maximum hours an employee can work within a shift. Do employees work overnight, from one day to another? This is a yes or no option. We at Easy Clocking recommend selecting this option if there are employees within the company being enrolled whose shifts pass midnight. If this option is not selected, shifts going past midnight will be treated as separate shifts within the software and won't be combined. Do you want to pay overtime? This is a yes or no option, defining whether or not your company provides overtime to employees. You must specify the overtime rules to be applied within the Easy Clocking software should you decide to apply overtime policies to your company profile. Do you want overtime applied after a specified amount of hours in a day? And/or would you like overtime applied after a specified amount of hours in a week or by week? Selecting the Cut Shift at the end of the week option will only affect the overtime policies set within the software. Overtime policies will be applied until the end of the pay period or work week. You then have the option of specifying the overtime rate within the What is the overtime rate option. You may assign different pay class settings at a later date within the Pay Class sub-tab of the Settings tab. Select Next to continue on to the Double Time tab of the initial setup. Step 6. Within the Double Time tab of the initial setup, you must specify whether your company would like to enact double time rules within the software. Selecting Yes will enact double time after preset requirements are met. After a specified amount of hours in a day switch to double time, and/or after a specified amount of consecutive days worked in a week, after a specified amount of hours worked on any given day, if accumulated hours within a week total a specified amount or more, you can cut the shift at the end of the work week pay period. You also have the option of applying your double time rate. These settings can be modified at a later date within the Pay Class sub-tab of the Settings tab. Upon completion, select Next to reach the Lunch and Breaks tab of the initial setup. Step 7. Within the Lunch and Breaks tab, you have the option of having the Easy Clocking software automatically deduct lunch break hours from employees. You, as the administrator, must be mindful that this setting may go against legal procedures within certain states. We at Easy Clocking recommend consulting your state lunch policy guidelines before enabling this option. This option is only calculated in minutes, not hours. You can specify after how many hours to deduct lunch and breaks. If paying for lunch breaks, select the Yes option. You may specify what amount of lunch and breaks, time and minutes that you want to pay, as well as whether or not to pay lunch and break hours as regular hours worked. You may modify these settings at a later time within the Pay Class sub-tab of the Settings tab. Select Next to continue onto the Time Clocks tab, the final step of the initial startup. Step 8. Within the Time Clock sub-tab, you must register the time clock to be associated to your account within the Easy Clocking software. You must assign a time clock name, register the time clock serial number, and associate the time clock to the locations assigned to your company profile. Time clock information can be found within the Time Clocks sub-tab of the Data Collection tab. Selecting Create will finalize the initial startup process and provide you, the administrator, with full access to the Easy Clocking software. This ends the Easy Clocking initial setup software tutorial.